Welcome back and thank you for staying with us on KUTV Primetime News. As I told you at the beginning of the bulletin, we are streaming live on our social media platforms on Facebook, KUTV Kenya, on Twitter, KUTV_Kenya. It's also live on YouTube at KUTV Kenya Live. On the comment section, because of this discussion, you may want to have a question to my guest. You can tell me on the comment section. I'll be able to read it out to him to get the responses. Now, following the incident that saw a female motorist sexually assaulted in the city, President Uhuru Kenyatta announced a countrywide crackdown on Boda Bodas riders to nab rogue operators. However, this move has seemingly created more bad than the intended good, with authorities impounding both public and private motorbikes. And that necessitates the discussion tonight on advocacy for leniency and creating a distinction between public and private motorbike operators. Joining me tonight is Wakili Kennedy Marete, an advocate of the High Court and a bike enthusiast. Now, Wakili, thank you so much for dedicating your time for this discussion.
Thank you very much for giving me a chance to come here for these engagements.
All right, thank you. Now, let's begin from the source of the crackdown. The assault on the female motorist in the city. What do you make of it? The crackdown that President announced, was it really the best move in trying to contain or rather to nab the rogue operators in the city and the nation at large?
To begin with, I think any positive reforms in the motorcycle industry, coming especially from the government side, are made in good spirit, and the intentions are good. They're supposed to add value to the industry. Now, the problem is we have a lot of breakdown in a lot of systems in the country. Like, for instance, the source of the issue was an accident that happened between the lady who was unfortunately assaulted by some goons with a motorcycle. And what happened is, after the accident happened, the way things were handled on the spot was not professional in any way, or legal by that matter, because we live in a country where things like a simple accident can lead to losses and inconveniences lasting for months. People are not able to rely on the system to resolve issues. Like, for instance, you can't rush to the insurer to ask for a quick resolution to the problem, or even to court to try and get a quick resolution. So sometimes people get frustrated because they're not able to get that instant resolution that would enable them to continue their life as if the accident never happened. Right. That's why you see people resorting to uncouth responses or reactions to accidents, because that frustration tells you that these are people who are probably going to spend a lot of months of their life inconvenienced by that little incident. Right. But the incident is regretted. Whatever was done was illegal. And we feel bad that parts of the goons were riders from the Boda Boda industry. And of course, you see the repercussions have come to affect the entire community, because at the moment we live in a country where you cannot distinguish between private motorcycles and PSVs. And until such a point where we have done the same thing that was done in the matatu industry in the early 2000s, we will continue having a problem where the intentions to resolve issues surrounding or revolving around the motorcycle industry are good, but without proper engagements with the people on the ground who actually understand how these things can be done, we'll never be able to make progress, because we'll do these knee-jerk reactions where, ban all the Boda Bodas from the street. You end up like affecting private motorists, who include a lot of private riders who are female. And you see, one victim will lead to thousands of victims across the country. Right. And the problem with that is it doesn't add any value to the process. But the intentions are good. Right.
Now, it's good, Wakili, that you mentioned actually that the problem actually could be the system, because you find a case that something happens and, for the people, they know that they're not going to get, an immediate resolution to what has happened. Now they resort to these uncouth measures. But now, when you're talking about Boda Boda riders, we've seen them harassing people when, let's talk about maybe accident or cars, they harass the motorist. Some of them we have seen incidences where they end up, setting the car on fire or something of that sort. And we've seen them, of course, riding against traffic, riding on pavements. What really, what are the best solutions that can really, salvage the whole situation in the Boda Boda industry?
I will say the Cabinet Secretary for Security and Interior, Mr. Fred Matiang'i, said that we have at least 22 million rides from the Boda Boda industry per day, which makes it a very big industry. Now, of course, in a big industry of that nature, we are expecting that we will have very many legitimate operators within the industry, and a few goons who will masquerade not only as Boda Boda riders, but also as, do their criminal activities, trying to take advantage of those numbers to masquerade as operators of the Boda Boda, whereas the intentions are nothing to do with, are not aligned with the Boda Boda business. Now, the thing that will cause that to happen is because it is difficult to tell apart from who is the legitimate Boda Boda operator in the country and who is the goon.
Right.
And sometimes even when we're talking about the goons on the ground, they don't really have to be Boda Boda operators. But sometimes when the goons within the Boda Boda operators are doing the things they do on the streets, which we say are not illegal, there are other goons who don't even own bikes that will take advantage of that crowd to do things which are criminal in nature. So I believe that the best thing we can do to try and resolve this problem is an holistic approach where we ensure that all the legitimate Boda Boda operators are able to be identified with ease, both physically and digitally. You see, the way nowadays you're able to present your license and have it verified digitally, you can verify things like insurance, you can verify things like the rider's credentials, like their licenses. If we have a system which enables us to verify who the legitimate Boda Bodas operators are, it will be very difficult for the goons to hide within that industry. Because let me give you an example. Let's say we have color-coded Boda Boda bikes across the country. Let's say all of them have luminous colors that are able to be identified from a distance. And all of them wear reflectors which not only have the luminous and visible colors, but also have either their name tags or names, one name at the back, maybe an operator code at the back, and something like a barcode which can be scanned to verify who this particular Boda Boda operator is. Of course, if anything happens, it will be very difficult for that kind of a person to run away from the long arms of the law, because the police officers who are dispatched to the ground will be able to identify which bike was involved. And then, of course, most of these criminals will not want to have their information in that kind of a system where you have all the necessary information about the operators, the legitimate operators in a system. So these ones will be left amongst the major minority, which is the private riders. And of course now if you have, let's say, a bike which is not maybe painted in a conspicuous way and the rider is not dressed in a conspicuous way, if they commit a crime and they try to hide within Boda Bodas, they will be easily picked out. And even the legitimate operators of Boda Boda will want to get rid of those people who are ruining their reputation on the streets. And I can assure you, if we give empowerment to the Boda Boda industry operators, most of these crimes which are happening, revolving around crimes or criminals masquerading with Boda Boda operators will be controlled in a shorter time than it would take to control the problems revolving around drivers and matatus and stuff like that.
Right. Now, Wakili, let me just borrow from what you're saying that, when something happens, in incidences where something happens and it involves Boda Boda riders, you've mentioned at a point that, there are some goons, actually, we might be having goons in the Boda Boda industry, but then we can be also having like an incident occurs, but goons who are not even Boda Boda riders are also being involved in this. And then now taking an example of the crackdown that was announced by the president, he mentioned Boda Boda riders, but we've seen this, overlapping even to private bikers. So is there really a way that, a distinction can be created to ensure that, when such measures are being imposed on the industry, it goes specifically, to maybe, let's say, to the Boda Boda operators, or rather if it was something that was being enacted to the private bikers, to ensure that one sector does not, affect the other, sector?
You see, the good thing about this particular scenario is we are dealing with a situation which has been resolved in the past under different circumstances. In the early 2000s, it got to a place where the number of private vehicles on the road increased exponentially, and so did the number of public PSV operators. And at some point, some of the vehicles which were being used for PSV operations, like the Peugeot 504, it was not only being used by private owners or private motorists, but it was also being used by the government through these flying squad vehicles, and also for matatus, PSVs. So there was need to create a distinction between what is a private vehicle and what is a PSV vehicle. And the rules which were put in place through the Kibaki regime and Honorable Michuki RIP, they were able to do reforms which they decided, let us have yellow lines on all public PSV vehicles. Let us have color-coded uniforms to help them differentiate between legitimate matatu crews and the touts who work amongst them. And then they introduced things like speed governors, safety belts, and so many other measures which, if you look at them cumulatively, they have saved millions of lives.
True.
And if you look at that approach, if we were to bring the same to the Boda Boda industry, you see, we have a lot of criminals actually who operate Boda Bodas, because people who ride on the opposite side of the street and people who recklessly get into a roundabout when vehicles are coming and they weave through traffic, those are not like normal, they're not like law-abiding citizens.
Sure.
And the best way to try and control them is making it very difficult for you to make a mistake and disappear without being identified. We need there to be laws that enable everybody who has a motorcycle to make sure that their number plate is visible. If you're a Boda Boda operator, we need to look for ways of identifying you without necessarily having to go to a lot of systems. We can identify you from just seeing you. You can identify the bike, you can identify the rider, and you are able to tell apart from, who is who on the streets. That one will reduce, if done properly, that one will reduce people who are, not only masquerading as these riders, but even proper riders who want to take advantage of what they see other people doing and maybe breaking traffic laws here and there. We would also want the same to focus on the safety aspect, because I'll tell you this, yes, Boda Boda riders don't really bother to, most of them don't bother to provide, let's say, things like helmets and reflectors for their passengers. And their passengers, who are probably most of these Kenyans who are watching this show, they do not want to put their safety first. Like 99% of the people who ride Boda Bodas refuse to wear the helmet, saying it's dirty.
Sure.
Now you see, unless we have laws which make it completely compulsory for anybody on a motorcycle to be forced to wear the helmet for their own safety, we can reduce the fatalities from the Boda Boda industry exponentially. Like we can actually almost eradicate them, such that only people facing very serious accidents are lost to such accidents. But then right now we have a very disorganized unit. There is no distinction between who is private, who is a Boda Boda, who is legitimate, who is a lawbreaker. And there are no measures in place which can help identify those rogue elements that need to be weeded out, because we can weed them out. Like it's not impossible. And I'll tell you, the people who fend for their families through the Boda Boda business will do anything possible to not only clean their name as Boda Bodas riders, but they will also work with the government to weed out those rogue elements, because they're not feeling very good right now.
Sure.
When the crackdown was nationwide, people who were affected included a lot of innocent people. And as much as we, the private riders, would also want to be put in a pedestal where we don't get affected by things which involve the people who are commercially making use of their motorcycles, we also have to stand with the legitimate Boda Boda operators, because if their system is cleaned, it will clean the entire reputation of the motorcycle industry, and will probably get the respect we deserve from other motorists, because at the moment they really disrespect us and it puts us in danger.
Right, right, Wakili. Now, we have actually seen from the crackdown that was announced, we've seen Boda Boda riders actually, for those who rely on, the sector to fend for their family, and, the private bikers have also seen them joining these protests on the crackdown that was imposed. Now, if we are talking about, the protest, maybe this is not enough to, articulate their voices to get to the authorities. Is there a channel, maybe a formal channel in the first place that could hear the voices of, the pleas that Boda Boda riders and the private bikers are making, so that they can go and, talk about their issues, articulate their issues to the government to bring the solutions, to some of these problems?
Unfortunately, the people who are in charge of making the laws and making the regulations which affect riders in the country, most of them don't ride. You see, we might find people who are in charge of, let's say, ministries or parts of those ministries which affect, make the rules and regulations which affect Boda Boda and private bikers in the country, that are not, they don't have any hands-on experience with riding in the first place. So when we have a bunch of rules which have been made by people who don't really know what it takes to be that person who is on the ground riding those bikes, there's an element of cluelessness and rash decisions and making decisions we think is probably like beneficial to the group that are completely like not connected. There's a disconnect between that law and the application on the ground.
Right.
I'll tell you something as simple as, there is no benefit of saying that everybody follows, the traffic lines. Like, let's say when there's a traffic jam, If everybody on a motorcycle would park behind a vehicle the way cars follow each other, instead of splitting in between the lane and passing, we would have traffic jams increase exponentially. Let's say like even here on that Thika Road. Usually you find in the morning probably the traffic is around somewhere at around maybe Garden City. But if you add motorcycles, if you tell them don't lane split, the traffic will be at Thika.
Get sure.
So something as simple as lane splitting, it's something that can be done professionally and safely without necessarily putting either the rider or the vehicles at danger. But because there's that disconnect between the people who are making the laws and the people who are riding these bikes, there's a problem in terms of which laws are passed and which laws are not passed that could be beneficial to the whole system. I feel that there is need to engage people like us who are representatives of the people who ride motorcycles across the country. And by doing so, we would be able to give suggestions. We're not saying we'll pass the orders. We just give suggestions for consideration by the people who are passing these laws, and we would try to make them as sober as possible to enable not only a better, application of reforms on the ground, but also the involvement, public participation of the people who ride these motorcycles in the making of the rules which are going to guide and affect them. And that way, we would probably add so much value to the legislation affecting motorcycles in Kenya, to the extent that we would even suggest things they probably don't think about because they don't know them, that could actually make it easier for them to regulate the motorcycle industry and make it convenient and safer for all the users, including the people who don't own motorcycles but use them as passengers on the Boda Bodas.
Now, Wakili, when you're talking about legislation and probably bringing measures that are practical from the public participation of the operators, bringing measures actually that would reform the sector. But we've seen actually even from the initiative that were introduced earlier in the motor vehicle industry, we have seen actually when these measures are being implemented, they are in a way short-lived, because even let's take an example of the seat belts. There was a time when Interior CS Dr. Fred Matiang'i really insisted on it, and after a very short time you get Kenyans going back to their old ways. Now, what would really guarantee that even with the proper public participation, with bringing practical rules that may reform the industry, we might not go back to where things are currently?
You see, there's an element of self-regulation. I'll give the private bikers group in Kenya as the best example of this. Self-regulation means we have peer groups which encourage each other to not only, for their own interest, do what is prescribed by the law, but also go beyond. You see private bikers mostly, they will almost always have the most conspicuous gear that is beyond the helmet and the reflector, which is what the government prescribes as the requirements for you to be able to ride a motorcycle. Their licensing, they do it properly, and they have insurance, both the NHIF and private medical covers, which make it very easy for you to be able to be treated, etc., when you have an accident. There are structures which, like, it's a peer group, or where people, in case someone has an accident somewhere in the middle of nowhere, if they they are able to, a notification is made that an accident has occurred somewhere, other bikers will come and help in the process of not only taking this person to hospital, but also making the arrangements for how those things will be handled, like, taking the bike to the police station, etc., etc. Self-regulation is something that can even be done and has been done in the Boda Boda industry through their circles. I am very well aware that in counties like Kiambu County here, if you look at the way Boda Boda operators in areas like Thika, Kiambu, even here at Juja, they have really self-regulated to the extent that in those particular areas, the cases of crime are very low. Cases of people not gearing up, wearing the helmets, wearing the reflectors, providing helmets for their clients, they are very low, because the circles are able to say, if you're not able to follow the rules that we have prescribed for members, we are not going to admit you as our member. And if you're not admitted as a member within a circle that is prominent in an area, you're not going to do any business. So it locks out those rogue elements. So if we are given the empowerment to enable us not only participate in the making of the rules, but also to do as much as we can in the self-regulation part of it, we will reduce the workload of the government. Because if you're talking about millions of Boda Bodas, how many police officers do we have in Kenya to enforce all these rules? Not enough. So let us work with the industry very closely. I believe the intentions, the good intentions from the government are also reflect the good intentions from the operators and the riders. Because on my part, as a member of the private bikers community, I would say I have learned so much from my fellow riders who came before me than I have learned from any driving school or any law enforcement agency out there. Because these people will care about their members, they will care about the safety of the entire group. And that's why I'll give you an example. Since independence, I've only heard of one fatality involving lady riders in Kenya. Female private riders are the most disciplined and the best example of what self-regulation can do. These are people who will use their peers to ensure that even the newest member, someone who joins riding, as soon as you're spotted, you are included in their various communities. They will guide you through proper safety, routines. They will take you through training if you haven't gone through proper training, and they will ride with you and technically do what you call orientation into the system in a way that makes you not only a careful rider but also safe. And that's why you can ask anyone, even NTSA, you can tell them to look at the records. We never have any serious accidents involving ladies. If we can borrow that and apply it in all the other parts of the motorcycle industry, we change this country within a very short time.
Now, Wakili, we have seen the hefty charges that were imposed on the Boda riders and their motorbikes impounded as well. It's been a frustration that is not only on the Boda riders, because even the private motorbikes that were on the line of the law enforcers also were impounded and taken to the police stations and other authorities. But was this even legal in the first place? And probably what leverage do Boda riders and even the private bikers have? And then on these authorities, like the county council officers that causing more frustrations to bikers in the CBD and other areas, can they be regulated as well?
You see, the work of the judiciary is to be the custodian of the Constitution and to help the law enforcers be able to apply justice to cases that are brought before them. In Kenya, the justice system for the criminal traffic issues depends heavily on the police force. Now, the thing about how the police operate is they will follow instructions. If they are told to get rid of all Boda Bodas from the street, of course they will look for a scapegoat. One of the things that people were being arraigned in court for was obstruction. Have you ever seen a motorcycle parked in a way that is blocking traffic anywhere in the country?
Not at all.
But these are things which have gone to court, and since the court has been put in a position where if you plead guilty, which is what most riders will opt to do instead of going through the expensive and lengthy legal processes. Litigation is very expensive and very lengthy in Kenya. Like, for instance, something as simple as a traffic offense can leave you frustrated for months with your motorcycle held at a police station that cannot be released until the part where it's supposed to be used as evidence in the court is done. So most people will opt to plead guilty. Now, being like magistrates, these are our learned friends. We are colleagues. We probably went to school with most of them. And they follow the prescribed law. The law will be very general. For instance, it will prescribe a minimum fine and a maximum fine, a minimum jail sentence and a maximum jail sentence. And it is within the discretion of the magistrate to decide which, based on the circumstances presented before them, is most appropriate for that. So unfortunately, like most of the people who are operating the Boda Bodas, they're not exactly very well off. So when you start like throwing in fines which are even cash bail, which is amounts which are higher than the fines which someone is supposed to pay, you're told if you plead not guilty, your cash bail is 60,000. If you plead guilty, your fine is 30,000. Do you think anyone wants to commit 60,000 for something that they are not sure will end in their favor? Of course, no. There's also lack of confidence in the courts because they feel like the system has not put enough emphasis on the level of proof that police officers are expected to adduce in court for people who are presented with traffic offenses. But police officers are very clever. They just need to talk to a couple of their colleagues in order for them to be co-witnesses in court. So we have 3 people against one. Whose testimony will have better, chances of being, successful in court. Of course, it's the people with numbers.
Sure.
If you're alone and you've not been able to document your, let's say, like the offense you're told about, private riders, a lot of them have cameras. So when you tell someone like that one, I'm going to take you to court for this offense, they will have the evidence in their private cameras that will enable them defend themselves in court. What will Boda Boda operators use? So they're left in a place where they end up pleading guilty. You see, even if you were to do research on how most Boda Boda operators who are arraigned in court do, they will almost always plead guilty.
Sure.
Because they cannot risk losing their livelihood from their bikes being confiscated and stored at a police station until the litigation process is over. So we need to have that connection between, maybe a bit of leniency will help. Let's push for first offenders to be given the lowest fines instead of something in between. And then on the issue of access to the CBD, it does not make sense that me as a private citizen, I'm a lawyer, I'm able to drive to my offices in town, park, pay, spend the whole day peacefully, and drive home in the evening. But I cannot ride to town. Because there is some sort of reasoning which I have never really understood that says that because there's a blanket ban of Boda Boda operators from the CBD and there is no distinguishing characteristic between Boda Boda operators and private bikes, they will enforce that rule on everybody. And they never arrest you when you're doing a crime. They wait for you to stop at a light and then they come and plug your keys.
The key.
And now it is up to you to prove that you are not on a pavement. Because they always say you are on a pavement.
Sure.
Or you are not wearing a reflector. So many excuses. If the government, the county, the Nairobi county government would be serious about their operations and say, we don't even need to change constitutions to allow people to park in the public parking lots which are accessed by the same people when they're driving. Just create a way of sharing that space. And I think, of course, because there are more motorcycles than there are cars, you would probably make more money from it. Sure. And motorcycle riders are very generous people. We will share a space for people and be willing to pay whatever prescribed parking fees there. Another problem is the fact that we are not allowed to pay parking lot fees per day. You're told to get a seasonal parking ticket. Now, assume I'm a person who is rarely in Nairobi. I have business in Nairobi that allows, it needs me to be in Nairobi for 1 or 2 days a month. Why do I need to pay the season parking ticket? It does not make any sense. I don't understand who these people who are making these laws are, but they need to involve us and work with us in looking for ways of accommodating motorcyclists without discriminating against us, because it is discrimination. You can't tell me I cannot use the streets because there's no parking lot that is provided by the government, and you're the same government that has denied me the right to access the parking lots, which are available to other members of the public. And we're not asking for free favors. We will pay for that parking lot if they allow us to pay for it.
Now, maybe Wakili, because interest of time, the county has carries. Yes. Because, we've seen it actually when an operator, regardless of whether he is a private bike or a Boda Boda operator, you are just stuck in a jam and they come and pluck the key from you. That's frustrating. What can be done, for them also? Is there a way that, justice can also be done so that, they also go through the justice system and they also charge for some of these incidences? Or rather, for the private bikers, because you also see them, they normally have, some of them have the cameras. Are these also allowed to be used as evidence in the courts of law?
You see, the problem with the Kenyan system is a lot of things don't work the way they are supposed to work. And the fact that we have people, county council officers, who have some sort of power to come and pluck keys from your bike and tell you to push it for like kilometers to some parking lot and confiscate that bike because of something they have not even proven yet. It's like you're treated as someone who is already guilty before you're given your chance to go to court and defend yourself accordingly. Until such a time when we have laws which respect the human beings, the citizens of this country, that these laws are supposed to be protecting, we will never make any progress. Because, one, the burden of proof is supposed to be beyond in criminal, it's supposed to be beyond any reasonable doubt. So why would anyone come and pluck your keys and say you are on a pavement, and they don't have any evidence to that effect, but they know because they own, they run the city courts where most of these matters are held, they will have an unfair advantage over you. And then they have converted it to a business where you impound motorcycles, you store them at the prescribed storage for motorcycles that have been caught flaunting so-called traffic rules in the CBD, and then you charge parking fees, which are like, the rates are exorbitant. And for some reason, the government has allowed this to continue to happen. It is a shame. We request that it be stopped immediately, and we be involved in the process of coming up with the resolutions that would help control this. And then, why do they stop motorcycles that do not have pillion passengers? Because a lot of the people who are being arrested don't have pillion passengers. You cannot be a Boda Boda without a passenger. So it does not make any sense.
Right.
Let us be involved in the process of also working with the NCC and the NMS to see how we can make the relevant changes to include the operators of the motorcycle industry, especially the private riders, in the changing of the resolutions for this.
All right. Now, Wakili, online here, I'm seeing someone called Moses Mwangi saying great job, Wakili Timamu. Also, Anne Wanjiku saying thank you, Wakili. Now, maybe because of time, just in about a minute, what word will you be having for your fellow bikers in the country, and what message are you passing to the authorities as we wind up? Kindly in a minute.
On the part of private bikers, we have called for unity. Let us stand together. Let us work together towards ensuring that we show our numbers in a respectable and in a civilized way, and push for the resolutions that are going to make the reforms in the motorcycle industry beneficial not only to us, but the riders who will come after us. And then on the part of the government, I kindly request for engagements with stakeholders from the private motorcycle industry. There are a lot of leaders who are willing to go beyond their call of duty. We don't really have to do this, but we would love to be part of this process because we feel our involvement would have an impact that is going to make a difference in the country. Kindly, please, involve us. We will be an asset that will add a lot of value to this process. And I will say, on the part of the media, please do not get tired of involving us in these national interest matters, because in the long run, the more coverage we get, the more word we get out there, the more we'll have voices that are interested to push and work with us towards the resolution of these issues. So thank you very much for this platform, and we hope that it's going to bear fruit.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Wakili, for dedicating your time for this discussion. We hope to amplify your voices, of course, until something happens, until good measures and initiatives are implemented in that sector. And with that, we are taking a very short break. We shall be coming back with sports news.